In the salt-misted air of North Jersey, the scent of slow-simmered marinara and toasted garlic had defined a single street corner for over 60 years. Elias stood behind the worn wooden counter of his family's bistro, his fingers tracing the deep grooves in the mahogany, marks left by 3 generations of his bloodline. This wasn't just a business. It was a sanctuary of immigrant grit, a place where his grandfather had first served meatballs to homesick neighbors. Thousands of miles to the west, where the Pacific breeze met the shimmering asphalt of Los Angeles, Elena moved through the sweltering heat of a bustling hotel lobby. As an aspiring hospitality professional, she was a master of the hustle, her eyes fixed on the distant skyscrapers of a better future while she navigated the exhausting tides of the service industry. For both Elias and Elena, the arrival of the FIFA World Cup felt like a divine intervention, a golden promise that the world's eyes, and its wealth, would finally rest upon their doorsteps. The memory of the day the host cities were confirmed remained etched in their minds like a fever dream. Elias remembered his father's tears of joy as they watched the news on a flickering television in the kitchen, the plaza outside erupting into a sea of flags and cheering crowds. It was heralded as a once-in-a-lifetime economic miracle, a tidal wave of prosperity that would lift every local boat. In Los Angeles, the announcement ignited a similar fire. Elena watched the fireworks over the city skyline, convinced that the massive influx of tourists and the demand for high-end hospitality would be her ultimate ladder out of the suffocating cycle of working-class poverty. The euphoria was intoxicating, a collective breath held in anticipation of the glory to come. Yet, as the calendar turned, the first shadows of a more predatory reality began to stretch across the landscape. In North Jersey, Elias watched as black SUVs began to frequent the quiet streets surrounding MetLife Stadium. Property developers, backed by faceless capital, were moving with clinical precision, acquiring the modest homes and storefronts that had defined the neighborhood for decades. Elena saw the same creeping transformation in Inglewood, where the ground near SoFi Stadium seemed to hum with the cold energy of speculation. For Elias, the motivation was survival. He needed the tournament to succeed to preserve the bistro and prove to his skeptical father that their legacy could endure the modern age. Elena, meanwhile, saw it as her one chance to secure a management role that would provide the stability she had never known. But the spark of inflation soon turned the dream into a slow-burning fire. Global economic shifts collided with local greed, and suddenly, the cost of doing business became a crushing weight. The wholesale prices for Elias's kitchen began to climb without warning. Flour, oil, and transport surcharges for his daily deliveries rose week by week, eating away at his already razor-thin margins. Desperate to keep up with the rising tide and determined to capitalize on the coming crowds, Elias made a fateful investment gamble. He signed for a high-interest growth loan to expand his seating and renovate the dining room, certain that the international visitors would pay a premium for his family's authenticity. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. As Elias struggled with debt, Elena faced a more immediate displacement. Her landlord, a corporate entity that had recently acquired her building, issued a 30% rent increase notice. They were clearing out long-term tenants to convert the units into lucrative short-term rentals for the World Cup elite. The city she loved was becoming a playground she could no longer afford. The tension reached a breaking point when Elias finally saw the official FIFA transit maps. The fan zones were designed to redirect all foot traffic away from the local businesses, creating a sterile corridor for fans to move from luxury hotels directly to the stadium. His bistro, despite his massive investment, was being zoned into a dead zone, a ghost town in the shadow of a billion-dollar spectacle. As the countdown clock in Times Square flickered, the atmosphere across the New York and North Jersey area shifted from excitement to a heavy blanket of anxiety. It wasn't just construction, it was the rising cost of existence. Each chime of the local church bell seemed to signal another cent added to the price of survival. In Los Angeles, palm trees seemed to droop under an invisible tax touching everything from gasoline to bread. Both cities were bleeding, their lifeblood drained by a speculative frenzy that treated housing and food as luxury commodities. Every morning, residents woke to a world more expensive than the one they had left the previous night. Elias stood in a sterile office, paperwork in his calloused hands. The cold, sterile air of the office felt like a physical weight against his chest. He had come to apply for a vendor license to set up a stall near the stadium's outer ring. The clerk didn't look up as she quoted a fee that surpassed his entire annual profit. It was a corporate wall, designed to exclude small players. Only international conglomerates with billion-dollar budgets could afford to serve the fans. The system was rigged, ensuring every cent spent by tourists flowed back to the global elite, leaving local legends like Elias's Bistro to starve. In Los Angeles, Elena lived a fragmented life. She worked 3 jobs to maintain her apartment, cleaning luxury suites at dawn, waitressing at noon, and driving at night. Despite grueling hours, her bank account remained a parched desert. World Cup wealth acted as a magnifying glass for inflation, intensifying the struggle for those at the bottom. A carton of eggs now cost as much as an hour of her labor. She watched tourists in designer jerseys spend more on one cocktail than she earned in a day, while her grocery store replaced staples with expensive imports. In Jersey, betrayal struck from an unexpected direction. Elias's vegetable supplier, a family friend for 20 years, arrived without a delivery. Contracts were being torn up as stadium hospitality groups bought out regional harvests at a 400% markup. Elias couldn't compete. His kitchen, once a temple of fresh ingredients, relied on frozen substitutes just to keep the doors open. This shift alienated his remaining regulars, who noticed a decline in quality that Elias was powerless to stop as supply chains prioritized the elite. Stress boiled over in the bistro's office. Elias's father slammed his fist onto overdue invoices, shouting about the growth loan he called a noose around the family's neck. His father's hands, once steady enough to roll the perfect gnocchi, now shook with a mixture of rage and fear. The argument wasn't just about money. It was about the death of a legacy. His father saw the debt as a betrayal of immigrant values, while Elias saw it as his only attempt to survive in a world that no longer valued the independent man. The silence that followed was more painful than any argument. In Los Angeles, displacement was a visible wound. Elena watched as a grandmother was escorted from her home, her possessions piled on the sidewalk to make room for luxury rentals. The City of Angels belonged to the highest bidder. Meanwhile, security perimeters were erected around the stadiums. Concrete barriers and high fencing walled off the neighborhoods. Elias's Bistro was now trapped in a security zone, making it impossible for anyone without a high-priced ticket to reach his street. The final blow for Elena came from the infrastructure supposed to modernize the city. The transit system, buckling under security drills and VIP closures, suffered a collapse during the morning rush. Elena's bus was trapped in gridlock for 2 long hours. When she arrived at the lobby, her manager didn't care about the chaos. In a world for the global elite, there was no room for the tardiness of the poor. She was fired on the spot, her income vanishing as the sirens of the first official motorcades began to wail in the distance. The tournament began with a thunderous roar that shook the foundations of the host cities, yet that sound carried no warmth for the long-suffering residents. It was a shimmering billion-dollar spectacle of luxury suites and exclusive motorcades that systematically bypassed the gritty reality of the streets. Inside the stadiums, the air was thick with the scent of expensive champagne and corporate success. Outside, the contrast was jarring. Bright lights cast long, distorted shadows over neighborhoods where families huddled to save on electricity, and the music felt like a mocking soundtrack to a tragedy unfolding for those who truly called these cities home, highlighting the deep divide between global profit and local struggle. On the day of the biggest match, Elias stood silently behind his wooden counter in a heavy, suffocating silence. The streets of North Jersey were eerily quiet because police barricades and security checkpoints had effectively quarantined his entire block from the world. His bistro, which he had sacrificed so much to renovate, was a ghost ship in a sea of red tape. Tourists were shuttled through designated corridors that bypassed local commerce entirely. He looked at the empty tables and stacks of unused napkins. finally realizing the promised economic impact was a curated myth. It was a harvest for the corporate elite, and he was nothing more than a casualty of their greed and rapid expansion. In Los Angeles, Elena's reality had finally fractured into pieces. She was living out of her car, the 30% rent increase having pushed her over the edge into homelessness. Cruelly, her only source of income was a low-paying temp job cleaning the very stadium that had caused her economic destruction. As she scrubbed floors in a luxury lounge after a match, she looked at the discarded premium programs and gourmet appetizers. She was invisible to the wealthy people who walked these halls, a ghost in the machine of global entertainment. The golden ticket to a much better life she once envisioned had turned into a heavy mop and a bucket of cold, soapy water. As the tournament peaked, something inside Elias changed. Seeing the weary workers and displaced neighbors gathered near the police line, he stopped checking the empty reservation book. He replaced his sign with a simple, handwritten message. Free meal for those who live and work here. Ignoring his crushing debt and the restrictive official regulations, he turned the bistro into a community hub. It became a place of resistance where people priced out of their own city finally found dignity. He served his father's traditional recipes not for profit, but to preserve the soul of the neighborhood during its darkest hour, feeding the families forgotten by the bright stadium lights and the corporate victory celebrations nearby. When the final whistle blew and the circus packed its tents, the following silence was profound and bitter. Fans flew home and the media moved on, but for Elias and Elena, the nightmare remained. Prices for basics did not fall back to pre-tournament levels. Inflation was now the permanent baseline of their lives. The high-interest loan eventually caught up with Elias, and the bank seized the bistro. He lost the physical building, but in those final days of defiance, he regained the respect of his father and the gratitude of a community that saw its own struggle reflected in his quiet kindness and his immense bravery under the shadow of the now dark arena walls. Elena found a new, powerful resolve. She stopped waiting for opportunity and instead began organizing with other displaced workers. They formed a collective to fight for labor protections and fair housing before the next mega event could arrive. Her voice grew steady as she became a leader against corporate gentrification. The World Cup left behind empty promises, serving as a reminder that global events serve as catalysts for local displacement. The final image was not triumph, but a massive stadium overlooking a neighborhood where the people who built it can no longer afford to live there.